We all think we know the story of the 2016 election interference. But what if the real story, the most interesting part, wasn't the final conclusion, but the intense debate that happened to get there? Well, recently declassified documents are giving us a rare glimpse behind that curtain, letting us be a fly on the wall for the disagreements and decisions that shaped one of the most critical intelligence reports in recent memory. So the final verdict is history, right? Russia interfered. But that was the end of the process. Using these documents, we're going to rewind the tape and see how it all began. The internal arguments, the high-stakes choices, and the exact, sometimes bumpy path the intelligence community took to reach that famous conclusion. Here's how we'll break it down. We'll start with the very first alarms, then dive into the intense debates over what was actually happening. After that, we'll see how they decided to take action, what the final public report actually said, and we'll end on a lingering question that hangs over the whole thing. Let's set the clock. Our story kicks off in the summer of 2016. It heats up through the fall and into the winter, all leading to that major public report in January 2017. But what's really interesting is that a key piece of this puzzle doesn't even surface until years later, in 2019. Okay, let's go. We're jumping back to the summer of 2016. Long before this was front-page news, alarm bells were already starting to ring deep inside the U.S. government about the integrity of the upcoming election. You can almost feel the urgency in these declassified emails from late August. You've got top officials just scrambling. And get this, before they could even analyze the threat itself, they first had to figure out a more basic question: what kind of report do we even write? The tone is clear. Forget perfect. We just need to get something on paper fast. And that led them to a critical fork in the road. They had two main options. They could do a National Intelligence Estimate, NIE, which is the gold standard, super deep and comprehensive, but it takes forever. Or they could do an Intelligence Community Assessment, an ICA, which is way faster, more focused, and built for urgent developing situations. It was a classic trade-off. Do you want it thorough, or do you want it now? This email from an official at the Office of the Director of National Intelligence just cuts right through all the chatter. You can see it right there in the text. In the interest of time, they're doing an ICA, not an NIE. Boom, decision made. Speed was the priority. They needed answers yesterday, not months down the line. Okay, so they're moving fast, they've picked their format, but now comes the really hard part. The debate shifts from if they should write a report to what exactly it should say. The arguments kicked off, and a lot of it centered on just a single sentence. And this is where these documents reveal some fascinating and totally normal friction inside the intel world. The entire debate really boiled down to one huge question. What was Russia's ultimate goal? Were they just trying to mess with people's heads and undermine confidence in the election? Or was their goal to actually disrupt the mechanics of the vote itself? I mean, that's a massive difference. This wasn't just arguing over words. It was about defining the very nature of the attack. And check this out. Here we have a declassified FBI email where they're basically hitting the brakes. They're looking at an early draft and they say they'd prefer to soften the language. Why? Because the way it was written made it sound like they had proof that Russia intended to disrupt the election. And in their own words, they were uncomfortable making that assessment at this point. They wanted to be more cautious. And the FBI had specific notes. They suggested changing a whole section title from the very pointed "adversaries with intent" to something more neutral. But they also flagged a really chilling possibility. They noted that while a widespread hack was unlikely, a very targeted cyber attack in a super tight race, well, that could actually change the outcome. You know, this is the kind of rigorous back and forth you actually want your intelligence agencies to have. It makes the final product stronger. And just to be clear, this wasn't some quick one-off argument. No way. These emails show this debate raged for months. We're talking all the way into December, with the FBI still raising concerns on drafts of the president's daily brief. It just goes to show you how incredibly careful and frankly difficult it is to get all these powerful agencies to sign off on one consensus view. So by December, the dust from that internal debate is starting to settle. The focus begins to shift. It's no longer just about analyzing the problem. Now the White House has to answer a much more practical question. Okay, so what are we actually going to do about it? And this is where things get really serious. December 9th. The location, the White House Situation Room.
the Principals Committee, which is basically all the top national security leaders, they all get together in one room to hammer out a concrete response to Russia's actions.
And out of that meeting comes this 5-part plan. Part of it was punitive, hitting back. They decided to shut down 2 Russian diplomatic compounds, draft a plan to expel suspected intelligence officers, and recommend sanctions. The other part was about transparency and control, publicly releasing the technical details of the hacking and tightening travel rules for Russian diplomats.
So, they've got their internal response figured out. Now comes the final crucial step, telling the public. In January 2017, the intelligence community releases its unclassified assessment, and this is the report that would shape how the entire world understood what just happened.
And its key judgments were stark. They were stated with high confidence. The report assessed that Vladimir Putin himself ordered an influence campaign. The goals were to undermine public faith in the democratic process and to denigrate Secretary Clinton. It also stated that Russia's military intelligence, the GRU, passed hacked material to WikiLeaks, and, crucially, that Putin and his government developed a clear preference for then-President-elect Trump.
But, and this is a really important but, there was a nuance in there that got a ton of attention. On that specific point about Putin aspiring to help Trump's chances, the CIA and the FBI had high confidence. The NSA, however, only had moderate confidence. And the fact that they included that disagreement right in the public report is fascinating. It's a rare, transparent look at how different agencies can see the same intel and just arrive at slightly different levels of certainty.
And the report didn't just vaguely point a finger at Russia. It got incredibly specific. It named names. It pointed directly at the GRU, Russia's military intelligence directorate, and said they were the ones behind the Guccifer 2.0 persona and the DC Leaks website. That's about as direct as it gets. So you'd think that's the end of it, right? Reports out, the case is seemingly closed. But not so fast. Years later, another declassified document comes out, and it reveals one last, really complex chapter to the story that was still unfolding behind the scenes. This new chapter comes to us from a 2019 internal email, which only saw the light of day thanks to a Freedom of Information Act request, and it reveals yet another fascinating debate about how that 2017 assessment was actually put together. The email says, and I'm quoting here, "The dossier was a factor in the 2017 ICA. An assessment of the document was added as an annex." Now, the dossier being referenced here is, of course, the now infamous Steele dossier. And just for a quick refresher, the Steele dossier was a privately funded intelligence report. It was filled with some pretty explosive claims, but its credibility has been, to put it mildly, the subject of intense debate ever since. The key takeaway from this particular email is simply the neutral, factual statement that an assessment of this controversial document was attached as an appendix to that final intelligence report. This whole journey behind the curtain really reveals that intelligence isn't some perfect, finished product. It's a messy human process of debate, of analysis, and of making tough judgment calls under incredible pressure. And it leaves us with a pretty provocative thought, doesn't it? If this is the level of intense debate and uncertainty that goes into creating a high confidence assessment, what does that tell us about how we should all think about these things in the future?